The South China Sea, the 6th of February 2026, 6:00 p.m. Twilight had settled over Second Thomas Shoal, turning the horizon into a deep, indistinct gray. On the bridge of the BRP Malapascua, a 44-meter Philippine Coast Guard vessel, the crew was operating in dark ship mode, eyes adjusted to the low-light scanning for the shadow of the blockade. Suddenly, the darkness was shattered, not by an explosion, but by a silent, piercing lance of green light. It wasn't a searchlight. It was a concentrated, military-grade beam that cut through the bridge windows, scattering across the glass and burning into the retinas of the crew. In split seconds, the bridge went from a command center to a zone of total sensory denial. There was no shrapnel, no fire, and no sound. Yet the crew was incapacitated. If a weapon blinds you but leaves no scar, is it an act of war? The incident wasn't a random encounter. It was a calculated move in the most dangerous game of King of the Hill on Earth. The BRP Malapascua was executing a critical rotation and resupply RORE mission to the BRP Sierra Madre, a rusting World War II tank landing ship intentionally grounded on Second Thomas Shoal to serve as Manila's lonely outpost in the far-south and disputed waters. For Beijing, this rusty hulk is an eyesore and a strategic insult. Their goal is simple: blockade the shoal, starve the garrison, and wait for the sea to eat the ship until it collapses, forcing the Philippines to leave without a single shot fired. Usually this blockade involves physical blocking maneuvers or the brute force of water cannons. But on February 6, the Chinese Coast Guard CCG escalated the engagement spectrum. The vessel in question, CCG 5205, is a 4,000-ton cutter equipped with sophisticated surveillance and non-lethal weaponry. It dwarfs the 44-meter Malapascua, turning any physical confrontation into a suicide mission for the Filipinos. A laser is different. It sits perfectly in the gray zone tactics that are aggressive enough to achieve political goals, but subtle enough to avoid triggering the US-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty. By switching from water pressure to photon pressure, Beijing was testing a new theory. Can you blind a crew and call it navigation safety? The cat-and-mouse game began long before the visual contact. At a range of 10 nautical miles, the radar screen on the BRP Malapascua began to paint a large, solid contact moving with predatory intent. The Automatic Identification System AIS confirmed the identity CCG 5205. For the Filipino bridge crew, this number was synonymous with trouble. This wasn't a fishing boat, it was a Zhao-2-class cutter, a floating fortress designed to intimidate. The Philippine captain ordered a course correction, hoping to slip past the blockade using the shallow draft of his vessel. But in modern naval warfare, you cannot hide from physics. On the other side of the equation, the bridge of the CCG 5205 was likely a quiet, air-conditioned environment illuminated by the soft glow of multifunction consoles. They didn't need binoculars. Their ship was equipped with a high-powered electro-optical infrared EO/IR director, a stabilized camera system capable of tracking thermal signatures miles away. While the Filipino sailors strained their eyes against the black horizon, seeing only darkness, the Chinese sensors had already seen the heat of their engines and the silhouette of their hull. The Chinese gunnery officers weren't spooling up the 76mm main gun that would be an act of war. Instead, they activated a subsystem often overlooked in war games, the tactical laser designator. They were stalking the Malapascua not to sink it, but to intercept it with mathematical precision. As the distance closed to 4 nautical miles, the Chinese ship altered course, matching the Philippine vessel's maneuvers turn for turn. The trap was set electronically. Now it had to be sprung visually. The Filipino crew was looking for navigation lights. They didn't know they were staring down the barrel of a photon cannon. At 6:20 p.m., the tactical maneuvering ended and the assault began. The CCG 5205 executed a hostile intercept cutting across the bow of the BRP Malapascua at a terrifyingly close distance of just 137 meters, 150 yards. In the open ocean, this is considered collision distance. The Philippine captain, his nerves already frayed from the cat-and-mouse chase, prepared to order an emergency turn to avoid hull contact. But before the order could leave his lips, the bridge was engulfed. From the superstructure of the Chinese cutter, 2 distinct beams of high-intensity green light erupted. This wasn't the wash of a searchlight or the strobe of a signal lamp. It was coherent light, a military-grade laser. The beams struck the bridge windows of the Malapascua with surgical precision. Inside the cockpit, the effect was immediate and debilitating. The physics of the attack were designed to exploit human biology. The human eye, when adapted to the dark scotopic vision, is most sensitive to green light at a wavelength of approximately 532 nanometers. When a high-intensity beam at this specific frequency hits a dark adapted retina, it triggers a photochemical reaction known as flash blindness. For the crew on the bridge, the world didn't just get bright, it erased itself. The laser light hit the salt-encrusted glass of the bridge windows, causing a phenomenon known as blooming. The imperfections in the glass scattered the coherent beam, turning the windshield into an opaque wall of glowing green static. The pilot couldn't see the bow of his own ship, let alone the massive Chinese cutter looming just yards away. The spatial orientation that a sailor relies on, the horizon line, the stars, the faint silhouette of the enemy, vanished instantly. The crew instinctively shielded their eyes, turning away from the source, but the damage was done. They experienced intense eye pain, spotting, and temporary blindness. It was a sensory overload. Imagine driving a car at night on a highway and suddenly having a high-powered welding torch shined directly into your windshield from 10 feet away. Now imagine doing that while piloting a ship in rough seas with a 4,000-ton vessel trying to ram you. The officers were effectively navigating blind, relying on memory and internal sensations of movement, their primary sense of vision jammed by photon saturation. The Chinese crew on the CCG 5205 hadn't fired a single kinetic round yet. They had achieved a mission kill. They had severed the connection between the Philippine ship's brain, the captain, and its environment. In those agonizing seconds, the Malapascua was not a Coast Guard vessel. It was a blind man stumbling in a room filled with razor blades. Helm hard to starboard, all engines back 1/3. The command from the Philippine captain wasn't based on visual confirmation. It was a blind reflex to survival. Inside the bridge, the crew scrambled to execute a tactical disengagement, averting their gaze from the windows and relying solely on the glowing amber lines of the radar display to ensure they didn't collide with the steel wall of the CCG 52. They were fighting the urge to rub their eyes, fighting the disorientation, and fighting the panic that comes when your primary sense is stripped away in a hostile environment. Crucially, the Philippine Coast Guard did not uncover their deck guns. To do so would have been suicide. A 44-meter patrol boat cannot win a gunfight against a Zhao 2-class cutter. Instead, they deployed their most effective asymmetric weapon, the camera. A crew member shielding his eyes and squinting through the glare managed to point a handheld camera at the source of the attack. They captured the undeniable evidence, the pulses of green light cutting through the twilight. With the bridge compromised and the safety of the vessel at critical risk, the captain made the agonizing call to scrub the mission. The supply run to the Sierra Madre was aborted. The Malapascua turned its stern to the Chinese cutter and limped away into the darkness. To the Chinese commander, it looked like a victory. The blockade held, the supplies were stopped, and not a single shot was fired. But the retreating Filipino ship was carrying something far more dangerous than food and fuel, a video file that would soon corner Beijing on the world stage. To the untrained eye, the beam that struck the Malapascua looked like an oversized laser pointer. But in the world of military optics, this device is known as an ocular interruption system or a laser dazzler. The distinction is critical. A commercial laser pointer typically has a power output of less than 5 milliwatts. The system used by the CCG 5205 likely operates in the range of 500 to 1000 milliwatts, a Class 4 laser capable of causing permanent ocular damage at close range and effectively weaponizing the physics of human sight. The choice of color was not aesthetic, it was biological. The device emitted a beam with a wavelength of approximately 532 nanometers green. Why green? Because the human eye is evolutionarily biased towards it. Under low light conditions, the eye shifts to scotopic vision, relying on rod cells, which are incredibly sensitive to light in the blue-green spectrum. When this specific frequency hits a dark adapted retina, it instantly bleaches the rhodopsin visual purple, the pigment necessary for night vision. It's the biological equivalent of overexposing a camera sensor until the image turns completely white. This technology sits in a terrifying legal loophole. Protocol 4 of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, CCW, explicitly bans the use of laser weapons designed to cause permanent blindness. However, it does not ban lasers designed to cause temporary dazzle or flash blindness. Beijing exploits this distinction ruthlessly. They argue that the device is merely a warning tool to signal navigation safety, but at a range of 137 meters, the margin for error is microscopic. If the crew had been using binoculars, the magnifying optics could have focused that beam like a magnifying glass burning an ant, turning temporary dazzle into permanent retinal burns. The Chinese Navy has effectively fielded a weapon that attacks the pilot, not the plane, the captain, not the ship. It is a soft kill capability that disables a vessel by hacking the biology of the men steering it. The flash of green light at 2nd Thomas Shoal didn't just blind a crew. It illuminated Beijing's entire strategy for the world to see. Unlike previous incidents that devolved into he said, she said arguments, the Philippines this time had the smoking gun, or rather, the smoking video. When the Philippine Coast Guard released the footage of the laser attack, it stripped away China's plausible deniability. The international backlash was swift and severe. The United States State Department explicitly warned that an armed attack on Philippine armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft, including those of the Coast Guard, would invoke U.S. mutual defense commitments under Article 4 of the 1951 U.S. Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty. This statement effectively classified a laser attack as a potential trigger for war. Strategically, this incident has fundamentally altered the operational environment in the South China Sea. It has forced regional navies to adapt to a new reality. Photon warfare is no longer science fiction, it is standard operating procedure. We are likely to see a rapid deployment of protective countermeasures, anti-laser goggles, and sensor filters becoming standard kit for bridge crews across the Indo-Pacific. The gray zone has shifted. It is no longer just about water cannons and blockades. It is now an electronic and optical battlefield, where a sailor can lose their sight without a shot being fired. The line between non-lethal harassment and permanent physical injury has become dangerously thin, and Beijing is dancing right on the edge of it. The incident on the 6th of February 2026 serves as a chilling preview of future maritime conflict. We are entering an era where wars may be fought and won without a single explosion. By using military-grade lasers, the Chinese Navy operating through the Coast Guard has demonstrated a capability to neutralize an enemy asset by targeting the biological vulnerabilities of its human operators. It is a clean, silent, and terrifyingly effective way to enforce a blockade. The BRP Malapascua was not sunk, but it was defeated. However, this tactical success carries a massive strategic risk. Every time a laser is fired, there is a probability of error. If that beam had lingered for a second longer, or if a Filipino sailor had been using binoculars, the result would not have been temporary dazzling, it would have been permanent blindness. In that scenario, the political fallout would be indistinguishable from a kinetic shooting. We are one retina burn away from a treaty invocation that brings American carrier strike groups into direct confrontation with the Chinese fleet. The South China Sea is now a tinderbox, and Beijing is playing with a laser pointer. If you want to understand the next generation of weapons that don't just blind but burn, make sure to subscribe. Next up, we're investigating the carrier killer missiles that are aiming to turn the Pacific into a no-go zone. You won't want to miss it. Bye for now.